It's always got a really good squeak to it. I like it. I even loosened it beforehand. May the Lord be with you. Amen. Thanksgiving is a wonderful time to get together with family. As often as not, that's what we do around this season and on this weekend. Hopefully, for you, getting together with family does not come with any kind of awkwardness. For some, and I know this may come as a shock to you, there might be some tensions in families. It does happen from time to time. Sometimes there's things that we don't talk about, but maybe we should. Family can be complicated. But you always keep coming back to have to deal with it because you are connected. And then it will come back again and again. Although we may wish to never see them again, perhaps we would find it easier. There seems to be something that happens with family that we keep coming back to try to deal with it and make things right. As we pay attention to Jacob as he journeys coming back from exile, I want to pay attention today to his return to meet with Esau, to the reconciliation. It's not as good a reconciliation. It's not perfect, but it is something. And I want to pay attention and look at that today and see what God is saying to us through this text to our own lives, to our own sibling rivalries, to our own family conflicts, both within our immediate family, but also the family of the church and the family of all humanity. Now, in this series, one of the things I've been kind of pointing and alluding to is this idea that Jesus talks about a story where he says, there once was a man who had two sons. Because, of course, Jesus knows that we all are aware of the rivalry that happens between siblings. That there's this tension, this pressure. The one can have success, and it means that the other will not have success and blessing. It's one or the other. And this rivalry drives us against each other, and it can be turned into sin. As we saw in Cain and Abel, it can be turned into the sin of murder. Or perhaps as Jacob and Esau did, Jacob leverages the potential death of his brother in order for his own benefit. We can have proxy murder, if you will. Sibling rivalry becomes sin is meant to be dealt with through mastering sin. God tells Cain, sin's desire is for you, but you must master it. So we come this week to Jacob's ultimate and kind of final meeting and struggle with his brother. And he says to his brother, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. It's an incredibly powerful line. Jacob, who we saw was farsighted. He could not see the face of the person present in front of him. He couldn't see Esau's humanity suffering, and he was willing to kind of, I don't care about that. I'll even use it for my advantage because what I care about is the blessing and the inheritance that I can get if I leverage your suffering. Jacob was farsighted, whereas Esau was nearsighted. I can only keep score between me and you, and I can't kind of see the distance. Nearsighted and farsighted, but Jacob seems to have somehow become God-sighted. When I see your face, it's like seeing the face of God. How did Jacob get there? Well, in the scene before, just before he meets Esau, the scene just prior is Jacob wrestling at night. Jacob, as my wife says, the absolute turkey, sends everybody on ahead between him and Esau. And Jacob remains alone at night. Jacob wrestles in the night with an unnamed opponent. And what happens is that Jacob doesn't tap out. In the wrestling match, it seems that the opponent kind of has complete power. At any time, the touch that puts his hip out is the lightest touch. It's a mere pressure point kind of a touch. At any point, the opponent, we are given kind of the sense, at any point the opponent could have knocked Jacob out of the fight, but wanted Jacob to give up, wanted to see how long, Jacob, are you going to hold on? Turns out Jacob will not let go. Even with his hip out of joint, he's going to hold on. He says, I won't let go until you bless me. Alone at night, Jacob will not let go until he's blessed as he wrestles. I find this story one of the most powerful stories in Scripture from my own experience of what it means to be a Christian, to try to figure out what it means to walk with God. Have you ever felt in your space and time on earth as if you are alone at night, even in broad daylight, in your walk with God. I wonder if it is, in fact, part of everyone's experience of trying to find what it means to follow Jesus. That in doing so, we will experience and know what it means to be alone at night in the darkness. Jesus certainly felt this himself. Alone in the Garden of Gethsemane, his disciples nearby, but they couldn't stay awake and keep watch. As he was going through the incredible turmoil of his soul, could you guys just pray with me? Can't you just stay awake with me? He felt so alone there. And then, of course, on the cross. There are times in your life, as I presume it's similar to in my own life, where we question God, where we ask, why are things this way? Why are they not another way? God, why do you seem to need me to experience things in this way? It feels like it would be better if it wasn't this way. Perhaps all of your cards are on the table, if you will, and you're hopeless, empty and alone when we wrestle, perhaps with our doubts. Asking things like, is the Spirit truly with me? Is the faith that I have, is it made up or is it sure and true? For myself, I even wonder about how is the words that I'm speaking, is God at work through what he is asking me to do? I believe that the gospel is true and sure, and even though I am fallible human being that I am, I know that God works through the words of Scripture that I'm talking about and talking around on a Sunday. I believe that, don't I? His word will do what he has called it to do. Perhaps you're married. Perhaps you have an intimate relationship that is good and healthy. You may be a parent with children that you have good and healthy relationships. You could be a child with a healthy relationship with your parent. You may have good friends all around you. You may have Christian brothers and sisters that you are intimate in knowledge of one another's lives. And yet, we all go through dark spaces alone. We experience this dark night, experiences of our faith being tested and refined, where God lets us experience this profound sense of doubt that perhaps he is not with us. And I think it's actually through these dark experiences that we experience the profound, true, and authentic blessing of God's presence with us. It isn't only when it is good sailings for us. If it was only in the good times where God is with us and where we actually experience him, then Christianity and churches are actually not that efficient at doing it. And we could probably find a club of things that we like to do with people that we get to choose. Yeah, you're in my club. We could actually make it a lot easier. But in the Christian church, the witness and the testimony is that it's not all easy and good sailing, that we are called to participate in this world as if we were carrying a cross. The true blessing of God comes as the church and in our own Christian walk, as we're able to experience these dark places, and as we move through them and find, in fact, Christ is more with me than ever I knew. And that experience through the darkness becomes one of sweetness, even as it was bitter. It's through that darkness that Jacob wrestles. He will not let go until he is blessed. Isn't he already blessed? By this point in the story, remember, he stole a blessing, and then he got a free blessing from Isaac, and then God gave him a couple more blessings. He has had a lot of blessings, Jacob. You need another one. And if we look back, God says he's going to be with Jacob all the way through his exile. And I wonder if Jacob comes to this point and says, I need to know you're really with me. Through his exile, it's interesting to kind of track. God says, I'm going to be with you through the exile. So can we see through that time that Jacob was away from his homeland, and he was with Laban, and he was struggling with Laban, and he got Rachel and Leah as wives, not in the order he wanted. He didn't even want Leah, but now he has her, and he's got to deal with this. And now Laban says, well, if you really want some wages, because I know you have a big family, you need to care for them, you need a flock, that's going to be another 6 years. 20 years later, Jacob, through the exile, perhaps he's beginning to wonder, is God really with me? And it's interesting, if you track through that story, where did God show up in that story? God promised to be there, so where was God in that story? And what's really interesting to see is actually it's first with Leah. In the story, where does God show up in Jacob's exile? And it's first with Leah. Leah was struggling because she was not loved by her husband. She didn't choose to be swapped out for her sister. That was her dad's idea. She just had to go along with it because she could not be ostracized from her father, so I guess this is what I do. And now I'm married to this man who doesn't love me, and I'm not having any children. Neither is my sister, which, thank goodness, otherwise I'd feel really bad. But God saw Leah and opened her womb. The first person that gets to meet and is blessed by God in Jacob's exile is actually Leah. The second person that is met by God, that is blessed by God, is Rachel. God sees Rachel and opens up her womb as well, and Joseph is born. And then the next person that is blessed by God in Jacob's exile is actually Laban. Laban recognizes. It says that he takes a divination, a divine reading, and realizes that it's because of Jacob's presence with him that in fact Laban has been blessed. And so you come to the end of that story and you realize it's Jacob's presence with all these people that has been blessing them. And Jacob, I think, might be feeling a bit like, well, they're all feeling blessed. But did Jacob read the blessing that he got? Remember, the stolen blessing was about authority, grain and wine, but primarily around authority over your brothers. And then the free blessings that he got, Abraham's blessing that he got from Isaac, was about land and descendants. And from God himself, Jacob, you're going to be a blessing to many nations. Through you, nations are going to be blessed. So Jacob goes down into exile, and through Rachel and Leah, he begins to have children. The descendants, the answer to that blessing is starting to happen. And through his time there, you start to see that the people around him are being blessed. The consequences of his sin, the deception of his brother and his father, the consequences of that sin are not removed, but through the blessing of God, grace and mercy are running even faster than that sin can infect his family. There's grace and mercy because God is present in that space, blessing others through Jacob. That's what you're called to, Jacob. I didn't call you to an easy and a good life. Yes, you will have to live in the consequences of your sin, but through you, others will experience the blessing of God. So Jacob is beginning to see this as he comes to the end of his time with Laban. And he starts to head back to Esau, and he realizes, actually, I think those blessings are coming true. And so he prepares himself to go and to meet Esau. And the first thing he does is he sends messengers. The text reads, this is in chapter 31. Jacob sends messengers on to Esau to figure out, I don't want to be surprised, and I don't want to surprise Esau. I think it's better if he knows I'm coming, so I'll send a messenger on ahead for Thanksgiving dinner so he can have something ready for me, that sort of thing. The messengers come back and they tell Jacob, Esau has 400 men coming to meet you. That would put the fear of Esau in anybody's heart. So Jacob runs through a bunch of contingency plans. The first thing he does is he splits his camp. Because if one side gets killed, then the other side should stay alive. And then Jacob does some more contingency plans. He puts his family in front of him, and he puts the maids with their children, and then he puts Leah with her children, and then Rachel with his children. Whatever Jacob's going through, he still clearly has preferences. And as we'll see in the stories that follow, he still very much has preferences among his children. So the sin and the consequences of who he is are still going to be lived out in this family. He puts them ahead of him, kind of hoping, if one side dies of the two camps, the other side will live. If the maids get killed, maybe Rachel at the very back of the train, maybe she can survive with Joseph. And that's when he wrestles in the middle of the night. He's preparing himself to meet Esau, wondering what kind of a reception he's going to get. With all his contingency plans in place is when he ends up having a wrestling match with the being that he says, I think I saw the face of God, and I can't believe I'm still alive. And it's in that wrestling that he holds on for the blessing. His contingency plans were all about face. In verse 20, it says that he wants to he wants to cover up the anger of Esau's face. And then it says that he wants to put the gift in front of him before his face. And that when he meets Esau, that Esau would lift up his face. It's all about face. And so on the morning when he comes to see Esau, and he's wondering what kind of a reception he'll get, Esau outruns 400 men. I think this is the climax of the story. It's the moment in the story that we could not have seen coming. Esau outruns his 400 men. What did he tell those men that were out here to do? I'm sure he told them, I'm not happy with Jacob. I think Jacob is my enemy. Otherwise, why would he bring 400 men? So he brings these 400 men, but something happens in Esau, and he outruns the 400 men. Reminds me of Jesus' story, of course. There was a man who had 2 sons. In that story, as you know, the younger son goes away into a kind of an exile and comes back and says, if I could only be your servant. And the younger son prepares this line, I would like to be one of your servants, Dad. Just give me a spot at the base of the servant totem pole. Jacob has the same idea. He keeps calling Esau, my Lord, my Lord. He will not use the language of my brother with Esau. Could I just be your servant? Jacob, who stole a blessing about authority over his brother, has returned to meet Esau and is saying, can I just be your servant? Esau's response is to run. This would probably be shameful to the 400 men. Like, what are you doing? This seems odd. But Esau's going to run ahead because, of course, he doesn't want one of the 400 men to say, I'm going to win Esau's favor by killing Jacob before anything can happen. So he's going to run ahead of that evil. Before any murder from sibling rivalry can happen, I'm going to outrun it. And he embraces Jacob and he weeps with him as a way of saying, you have found favor with me, Jacob, and we're together. We don't need to have rivalry become sin. It's Esau, interestingly enough, that represents God, the Father, in this story. So do they live happily ever after? They don't. And there's little elements in this story that this reconciliation is not perfect. When Jacob says that to see your face is to see the face of God, he says to Esau, you should take my gift. And it's interesting, the word gift here is minha, which we saw back in Cain and Abel's language. It's that same gift language. And it usually means a tribute as a servant to a lord. Jacob won't call Esau brother, even though Esau is calling Jacob brother. Jacob isn't ready to go there. Something seems to be missing. And then Esau says, I don't need the gift. I have enough. I have lots. I have plenty. And Jacob responds, well, I have everything. You need to take my blessing. What an interesting choice of word there, Jacob. Does Jacob realize that he actually does have everything in God? And so he can give to Esau back the blessing that he had stolen. What an interesting choice of word there. I have everything. And then Esau and Jacob play this little game where Esau says, well, tell you what, let's all go together. We'll go back to my house. We'll go back to my space, my land. We'll all go together. And Jacob says, no. We'll just slow you down. The kids and the flocks. You've got 400, soldiers. We're too slow for you. And Esau says, okay, fine, but we'll put some of our people with you. That's not necessarily a good thing. Why does Esau want to leave soldiers with us? And Jacob says, no, you don't need to do that. You don't need to be so kind to us. And at that point, Esau can't kind of insist, no, we're going to leave our soldiers with you. The game of hospitality there. So Esau has to say, fine, we'll see you there. And Jacob says, I'll follow you, but he doesn't. He goes to a different city entirely in the opposite direction. So although Jacob sees in Esau the face of God, there seems to still be some measure of tension, of rivalry, of which peace and reconciliation is not full and complete. These two men were not able to do it on their own. This story isn't meant to be an archetype. It's not meant to be something in which we say, well, my reconciliation with my brother should follow this too, and so of course we should then split after we've kind of reconciled. No, not necessarily. This text isn't meant that way. What I find when we see this in the text, when we don't say Jacob is the hero, Jacob does everything right, and Jacob is the one we're supposed to model and copy, if we move away from that, what ends up happening is we start to see Jacob more as he is. And in that space, we can say, oh, I can actually kind of now see myself in that story. When he's held up on a pedestal, it's much harder to see myself in that space. Whereas when I see him as he is, one who struggles and wrestles with his brother, one who struggles and wrestles at night with God, and one who isn't quite sure how to work out this reconciliation in a perfect, easy, harmonious way, I start to say, oh, that's more like me than it was before. And what I find is that these two stories cannot be split. Throughout the text, there seems to be divisions. Even in Jacob's camp, he divides them into two. Jacob and Esau have been split, and they come back together, but they're still split. But I don't think these stories can be split, the one of Jacob wrestling at night and the one of Jacob seeing in Esau the face of God. I think these are intrinsically linked, that Jacob could not have seen in Esau the face of God unless he had wrestled the night before, the 20 years before, wrestling with who God is and how he's supposed to live in this world. What I think is that the one that we have rivalry with in our own life, the people that we might see as our rivals, could it not be that in fact they are the ones in whom we could see the face of God? If we're willing to wrestle with God in the darkness of the night, then we will be able to, in those who are accidentally with us along the way, we will be able to see God's face with them. What I'm trying to tell you is that as you become part of a church, as you move about in Christian society, there's a temptation to say, I'm only going to meet with the people, I'm only going to be around the people that are easy for me to be with and around. I think what this text tells you is that in order to see the face of God, you need to be willing to wrestle and to work through things, even with those who perhaps aren't of the same stripe as yourself. In the Christian church, in the Christian community, it's God who calls them together, not me. I don't get to choose them. And so it's in that space in which we find, actually, through knowing you and trying to live with you, it is shown to me who Christ is more fully as I see in your face the grace and mercy that I know that Jesus Christ has. It's in Jesus, of course, that we truly see the face of God. But Jesus has decided to not be present with us now. It's only through his Spirit that he's present with us. But the Spirit reveals Christ in the face of our brothers and sisters. So I encourage you, pay attention to the own dark spaces in which you have experienced God expressing himself present to you through your doubts as you strive to work out what it means to believe. And then as you live out what that expression means in life with those around you, pay attention to how God is present through them. Pay attention to their face. Pay attention to your brother and sister, and in them you shall see the very face of Jesus Christ as he cares for you, provides for you, expresses grace and mercy to you. And may you do that to the others as well. Amen.